There's a problem with the current implementation. For every input field, we have to handle the onBlur and onChange events, and then we have to add an error message component. Here we have to set the error to errors.whatever, and visible, we have to set it to touch.whatever. Now we have to repeat the same pattern for every input field in this form. This is bad. This is duplication. So over the next few videos, I'm going to show you a few refactoring techniques. We're going to extract a few reusable components, and the end result is going to be absolutely beautiful. You're going to love it. Now, quite frankly, these techniques I'm going to show you, you don't find them in other courses. So pay close attention. Now, how can we solve this problem? Well, we need to encapsulate this input field and its error message inside a reusable component. So instead of adding these two components for every input field, we're going to use that new component. Let me show you. So here in the components folder, let's add a new file. We're going to call this app form field. I will explain why I'm choosing this name in a second. Now we create a function component. Now back to our login screen. I'm going to grab this input field and its error message. So let's copy these few lines and paste them over here. Now before we do that, because we're copying two components, we need to wrap them inside a fragment, because we can return only a single element or a single component here, right? So let's paste that code. Okay, now we have to bring in a few components. So we should import app text input, because we're using it over here. We should also import the error message component. Let's do that as well. Import error message. Now, to make this reusable, we're going to get rid of some of these props. For example, auto-capitalize doesn't apply to every input field, so we don't need this, but I'm not going to delete it yet. I just want to comment it out. Similarly, we don't need autocorrect, icon, and keyboard type, so comment. We're going to keep onBlur and onChange events. Then we're going to remove placeholder and text content type. Now, here we don't want to hard code email. You want to be able to pass the name as a prop. So I'm going to give this component a prop called name and use that over here. Okay, so I renamed both instances. Now, similarly, when we go to the errors object, we don't want to access the email property. We want to access a property by its name. So here we use the square bracket notation to access the property with this name. Okay, we have to apply the same change here. So touched of name. Okay. Now there are a few things we need here. We need the errors object, we need the touched object, as well as these two functions, setFieldTouched and handleChange. But how do we get them here? We are not inside a Formic component. So how can we get access to these objects? Very easy. So Formic has a function. We're going to import use Formic context from Formic. So Formic uses React context to pass objects down. If you're not familiar with React context, go watch the last section of my React course. But very briefly, with context, we can pass an object down our component tree without having to drill a property at every level. So we can consume that object anywhere in our component tree. So Formic uses React context to pass these objects down. Now, we can consume those objects inside our custom component. So here we call use Formic context. Now VS Code re-imported this function. This is really annoying. So anyway, we call this function. Now this returns an object. We can destructure that and pick the properties we need. In this case, set field touched, handle change, as well as errors and touched. Okay, so now we shouldn't have any compilation errors. But what about these props? Well, here we're going to use the REST operator to get the other props and put them in a single object. Then we're going to use the spread operator to pass those props to our text input component. This is basic React. We have talked about this before. So let's get rid of these comments. Okay, now we have a reusable form field. So we can go back to our login screen. I'm going to replace this app text input with app form field. Now, every form field should have a name property. If we don't set this, we're going to get an error. Now, the proper way to handle this is using prop types. We'll talk about that in the future. But for now, let's set the name prop here. So I'm going to set the name to email. Now we no longer need to handle the onBlur and onChange events. We also don't need the error message component either. Similarly, for our password field, we're going to set the name to password. Now let's remove these two lines and the error message. Save the changes. So let's test our app. All right, we get this error. Objects are not valid as a React child. Once again, this is coming from error message implementation in Formik Connect. That happened because in our new component, auto import ended up importing the error message from Formik. We have to replace this with the error message component that we created. So see, that's the problem with having name conflicts. So we're going to import error message from the current folder. Now delete this line, save, and test it one more time. Here's our form. We only see the validation error for the email field because in our login screen, I forgot to replace this with app form field. Let's try it one more time. Both validation errors are there. Beautiful. So we're going to continue with our refactoring. Next, we're going to create a submit button.